Viewer discretion is advised. Before the cameras rolled, before the headlines ignited, before the internet turned a morning interview into a national spectacle, there was silence. The kind of silence that hums with the electricity of something about to go terribly wrong. An ordinary morning inside the Good Morning America studio. The world outside buzzed with routine. Coffee brewing, alarms blaring, commuters scrolling through their phones, while inside, a machine of precision prepared to broadcast warmth and optimism to millions. Every cue, every light, every lens was perfectly aligned. That was the beauty of live television. Nothing accidental, everything rehearsed. And in the middle of it all sat Michael Strahan, calm, focused, confident. The former NFL legend turned media anchor had built a career on charm balanced with credibility. His voice carried the same steadiness that once commanded locker rooms and now comforted living rooms. He knew the dance of television, the rhythm of questions, the pauses that invite truth, and the instinct that separates discomfort from disaster. Today's segment? A royal guest, Meghan Markle. A name that guaranteed ratings, clicks, and conversation. The producers called it an easy win, a charitable promotion wrapped in elegance and goodwill, a perfect morning show recipe. But perfection, as television veterans know, is an illusion that can shatter with one glance, one word, one wrong tone. Dabbed Michael's temple. "You're good to go," she said softly. The producer's voice crackled in his earpiece. 2 minutes out, guest entering. Through the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a silhouette framed by stage lights. Meghan Markle walked in, poised and deliberate. Her presence filled the space instantly, not with warmth, but with weight. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that calculated the room rather than connected to it. The crew's quiet admiration was replaced by something else, attention too subtle to name yet. When she took her seat opposite Michael, cameras began their countdown. The theme music faded, applause followed on cue, and America tuned in. "Good morning, America," Michael began with his trademark ease. "We're joined by a very special guest today. Please welcome Meghan Markle." The applause died down and a second silence entered, sharper, colder. Meghan adjusted her dress, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and gave a nod that felt more like permission than gratitude. "Thank you for joining us," Michael continued. "We're excited to talk about your new charitable initiatives and the impact they're making." Her response came measured, perfectly enunciated, but carrying an undercurrent that sliced through the air. "Well, Michael, I appreciate being here," she said, her smile tightening. "Though I must admit, I expected a more sophisticated opening." A small ripple of unease passed through the studio. Camera operators glanced at each other, wondering if they'd misheard. The tone was subtle but unmistakable. Michael's practiced professionalism clicked in. His smile held steady. "Of course," he said lightly. "Then let's get right to it. Tell us about the mission driving your work." Patriotism didn't soften. "Mission?" she repeated, almost amused. "It's not just a mission. It's transformation. I suppose not everyone understands the difference." And there it was, the first fracture. Michael leaned forward slightly, still calm, still gracious. "Transformation is a powerful word," he said. "What kind of change are you hoping to inspire?" Meghan's laugh was small, sharp, and cold. "Michael, you're asking the wrong kind of questions. You're thinking in sound bites. The work I do doesn't fit into the limits of this format." The director's voice whispered through Michael's earpiece. "Keep it light. Redirect." He tried. "Our viewers come from all walks of life," he said. "They love hearing stories that inspire them to make a difference." "That's exactly the issue," Meghan interrupted, her tone rising slightly. Everyone wants inspiration without education. They want to feel good without doing good. Landed like stones in still water. Ripples of discomfort spreading across the crew. Michael smiled again, but the warmth had faded from his eyes. "Let's talk specifics," he said, his tone grounded. "What's one cause you'd like our audience to understand better?" The question should have been safe. Instead, it sparked fire. "That's the problem," she said, leaning back. "You think charity is about causes. It's about systems. And honestly, I don't expect morning television to grasp that." The floor manager froze. The control room murmured. The line between confidence and contempt had been crossed. Not loudly, but cleanly. Michael's posture shifted just slightly, the first sign of strain beneath composure. His jaw tightened for a heartbeat before he smiled again. "Well," he said quietly, "maybe this morning we can bridge that gap together." Everyone watching, crew, producers, even the viewers at home, could sense it. The storm had arrived. After Michael Strahan, the man known for grace under pressure, was about to find out how far grace can stretch before it snaps. The air in the studio was starting to thicken. What began as mild tension had evolved into something sharper, heavier. You could almost hear it, the soft static of discomfort filling the space between every word. Michael had done this long enough to recognize the signs. The clipped tone. The subtle arrogance disguised as intellect. The performance of patience that only thinly concealed irritation. He'd seen guests get nervous, defensive, emotional, but rarely condescending. Not like this. Still, he tried, because that's what professionals do. "You've spoken about the importance of global empathy," Michael said, choosing his words carefully. "How do you see that translating into real action here at home?" Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Empathy?" she repeated, her voice dipped in polite scorn. "Michael, empathy without awareness is meaningless. People love to feel, but very few are willing to think." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Even through the glass of the control booth, the director's face was tight. Michael nodded, trying to keep the tone civil. "Fair point," he said calmly. "But sometimes emotion is what inspires action. Our viewers, your viewers," she interrupted, the words like a knife through his sentence. "Michael, that's exactly what I'm talking about. They're comfortable being inspired. Inspiration doesn't change systems, it just helps people sleep better at night." Sentinel. Silence. Thick and deliberate. The kind that pulls all eyes to one person. Michael's voice softened, deliberate and steady. "I think you might be underestimating them," he said. "Our viewers are parents, teachers, nurses, people who work hard every day to make a difference in their own way." Her reply was immediate. Working hard isn't the same as changing the world. The line hit harder than she probably realized, or maybe exactly as she intended. For a fraction of a second, Michael's composure faltered, not visibly, but internally. He felt something twist in his chest, the instinct to defend not just himself, but the people who trusted him every morning. The director's voice whispered urgently in his ear. "Move it forward, Mike. Take her to the New York segment." He smiled, the practiced smile of a man who'd learned to hide his irritation in plain sight. "Let's talk about your recent visit to New York," he said, tone light again. "You met with several community leaders. What stood out to you most during that trip?" Her lips pressed together in a faint smirk. "What stood out to me," she said, "was how surface level most of the media coverage was, including yours." The control room erupted in whispers. One producer muttered under his breath, "She did not just say that." Another leaned toward the director. "We cutting to break?" "Not yet," came the answer. Let him handle it. And handle it he did. Voice remained calm, but the calm was colder now. No longer warmth, but steel wrapped in courtesy. I understand your frustration, he said, but the goal is to make complex topics accessible. We try to meet people where they are. Meghan's response was instant. That's the problem. You meet them where they are instead of challenging them to rise. For the first time, the audience reacted audibly. A collective shift. A murmur of discomfort. Even through the camera lenses, the tension was visible now. Michael leaned forward, folding his hands. Respectfully, he said, sometimes people don't need to be lectured to rise. Sometimes they just need to be heard. Something flickered in her eyes. Irritation, perhaps disbelief. Heard, she repeated slowly. You think listening is enough. You think conversation fixes anything. I think it's a start, he replied evenly. The conversation was no longer a dialogue. It had become a duel. The control room lights flickered slightly, a small technical hiccup that somehow amplified the unease. The floor manager gestured to the teleprompter operator, who sat frozen. Nobody wanted to miss a single second of what was unfolding. Meghan shifted in her seat. Michael, I didn't come here to debate with you, she said with controlled disdain. I came here to talk about meaningful change. But I suppose that's too ambitious for a morning show. Line hung in the air. Heavy. Cutting. Impossible to ignore. Michael exhaled slowly, the first visible sign of strain. He nodded once, choosing silence over reaction. But his eyes, calm, dark, unwavering, said everything. For years, he had built a reputation on empathy, respect, and control. But every reputation has its breaking point. And Meghan Markle, knowingly or not, was pressing closer to his. From behind the cameras, someone whispered, "This is going viral." They were right. It would. Because the next few minutes would turn a routine interview into a cultural lightning strike. And Michael Strahan, the man who never lost his cool, was about to prove that calm doesn't mean submission. The clock on the studio wall ticked toward the halfway mark of the segment, though it felt like hours had passed. Every exchange grew sharper, every pause heavier. The show's signature brightness had dimmed into something darker, rawer. Michael could sense the energy shifting in the room. The audience had gone quiet. Not the usual respectful quiet of engagement, but the tense stillness of people realizing they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. Meghan leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on Michael with an expression that mixed superiority and irritation. Her next words came slow, deliberate, and meant to wound. Michael, I've noticed something, she said. You seem far more comfortable asking questions that flatter your guests than challenge them. Don't you think that's part of the problem? The line landed like a slap. Behind the cameras, a sound technician mouthed, "Wow," under his breath. Michael inhaled, then exhaled through his nose, steady and quiet. I don't see journalism as a contest, he replied. My job is to inform, not to humiliate. Her smile was quick and sharp. Inform? Is that what you call this? Words hung there, venom disguised as civility. Simmons' voice buzzed in Michael's earpiece. Go to commercial, we'll reset. But he ignored it. This wasn't a technical issue anymore. It was about respect, something deeper than broadcast protocol. Meghan, he said, tone still polite but firmer now. You're welcome to share your views. That's why we invited you. But questioning my integrity? That's not productive. Shields her head slightly, eyes narrowing. Integrity is earned, Michael. Maybe you should try harder. Gasps rippled through the audience. It was no longer subtext. The tension had broken open completely. Michael's jaw tightened. His hands clasped together on the desk, a quiet act of restraint. "I've spent my career treating people with dignity," he said, voice even, but heavy with meaning. "I'd expect the same courtesy in return." Her laugh, brief, derisive, cut through the studio air. Courtesy doesn't change the world. Sometimes truth has to be uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, he echoed softly, as if tasting the word. There's a difference between uncomfortable and disrespectful. The director in the control room leaned toward the monitor. "He's done holding back," he whispered. The audience could feel it too, that subtle but unmistakable shift in Michael's energy. The warmth he was known for had hardened into composure laced with conviction. Crossed her arms. "You're proving my point. Every time someone pushes back, you hide behind politeness. Maybe that's why people like you never lead real change." Michael leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering just enough to demand attention. "People like me?" The words weren't shouted, but the weight behind them silenced everything. "Yes," she said, tone still condescending. "Media figures who smile, nod, and pretend that asking soft questions counts as journalism." Michael paused, studying her. Not the way a host studies a guest, but the way a man measures his patience. "I've interviewed families who've lost everything," he said quietly. "Communities fighting injustice, people rebuilding their lives from tragedy. You don't have to talk down to others to do meaningful work." She smirked. "And yet here you are, defending mediocrity." Room erupted in chaos. "We're cutting," one voice said. "No," said another. "Let it run. People need to see this." Nationality had stretched to its limit. Every word he spoke next was deliberate, calm, controlled, and resonant enough to echo across millions of screens. "Meghan," he said, "our viewers aren't mediocre. They're teachers who stay late to help kids who have no one else. They're parents who work 2 jobs to keep food on the table. They're nurses who haven't slept in 36 hours but still show up to save lives. You don't get to dismiss them because they watch television instead of preaching on it." Audience erupted. Not applause, not yet, but the sound of people breathing again after holding it in for too long. For the first time, Meghan seemed momentarily off balance. Her lips parted, but no words came. Then, regaining composure, she said sharply, "You're being emotional." Michael's reply came without hesitation. "I'm being human." The studio went still again. The kind of silence that no editing could fix, no PR statement could soften. He could feel the weight of every camera on him, every pair of eyes watching from home. But for the first time in this entire exchange, he wasn't performing for them. He was speaking to them. What had begun as a polite interview had become something else entirely. A collision between entitlement and empathy, arrogance and grace. And the man who had built a career on kindness was now standing at the edge of his breaking point. Not to lose control, but to reclaim it. The moment had shifted. The balance of power, invisible yet unmistakable, was no longer in Meghan's favor. Her words had lost their sting, replaced by something that sounded more like desperation dressed as defiance. Michael sat back, calm but unyielding, the embodiment of quiet strength. The studio lights reflected off his face, catching the faint tension in his jaw. Everyone could sense it now. He wasn't just interviewing a guest anymore. He was defending the dignity of everyone she'd just demeaned. "Let me ask you something," Meghan said suddenly, her voice carrying a forced calm that barely hid her irritation. "Do you ever stop to think about the kind of influence you have? You speak to millions, but what do you actually teach them?" Michael looked straight at her. "I try to remind them that kindness matters," he said. That's not teaching, she snapped. That's comfort. You make people feel good instead of making them think. You entertain when you should educate. The control room fell silent. Who'd been frantically gesturing moments earlier, stood frozen. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice dropped, quieter now. The kind of quiet that pulls people closer. Respectfully, Meghan. Maybe what people need at 8 in the morning isn't a lecture on how broken they are. Maybe they just need hope. Her eyes flashed. Hope doesn't fix anything. Neither does arrogance, he replied. A collective breath seemed to leave the room all at once. Even the crew, seasoned veterans of live television chaos, stared in disbelief. Meghan blinked, momentarily thrown off. Excuse me? Michael didn't flinch. You came here to promote causes that matter. I respect that. But somewhere between purpose and ego, you lost the plot. You stopped trying to reach people and started talking down to them. Her mouth tightened, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. You're twisting my words. I'm repeating your tone, he said softly. The audience audibly reacted now. A few gasps, one muffled, wow. What had been discomfort had turned into admiration. They could feel it, the quiet power of a man who'd had enough. You think this is about tone? She said sharply. This is about truth. About people like you using their platforms to make noise instead of meaning. Michael nodded slowly. Maybe, but truth without respect is just noise. Salmon followed. Long, heavy silence. The kind that stretches seconds into minutes. Meghan shifted, glancing toward the cameras, realizing, perhaps too late, that she had lost control of the room. Her charm had evaporated. What was left was defensiveness, raw and exposed. Michael continued, his tone still calm, but carrying an authority that filled every inch of the studio. You've spoken about compassion and equality, he said. But compassion doesn't work when it comes with contempt. Equality doesn't start with looking down on people you think understand less than you. Meghan's composure cracked for the first time. I never said that. You didn't have to, he said. You've spent the last half hour proving it. The audience's silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent. They were watching something rare, not a shouting match, not humiliation, but truth delivered with dignity. In the control room, one of the producers whispered, "He's rewriting the moment. Let it play out." Meghan straightened in her seat, gathering what was left of her poise. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You're misrepresenting everything I stand for." Michael shook his head slightly. "No, you're doing that yourself." She glared at him, then at the cameras, searching for support that wasn't there. The audience had turned. Even through the lens, it was clear. Sympathy had shifted sides. "Michael," she said coldly, "you have no idea who you're talking to." He met her gaze without hesitation. "I know exactly who I'm talking to. Someone who's forgotten that respect isn't a privilege, it's a choice." The studio erupted, not in chaos, but in stunned quiet. Everyone knew they had just witnessed the line that would define this confrontation forever. Meghan looked away, her confidence fracturing under the weight of the moment. For a split second, her expression softened. Maybe shame, maybe disbelief, before she masked it again. Michigan's voice softened too, carrying empathy even now. "You came here with something important to share. I wish you'd trusted people enough to listen back." No response. The producer's voice came through the earpiece again. "Mike, we can cut now." But Michael didn't move. He stayed silent, his eyes still on her, the unspoken truth filling the air. Misinformation. It was no longer an interview. It was a reckoning. Live, unfiltered, unforgettable. Meghan's composure was unraveling thread by thread. The poised confidence that had walked onto the set an hour earlier was gone, replaced by brittle defensiveness. She adjusted the lapel of her jacket as if to steady herself, but even that motion trembled slightly. "Are you finished lecturing me, Michael?" she asked finally, her tone sharper than before. "Because if you think I'm going to sit here and be disrespected, you're mistaken." Met her glare without blinking. "I think respect goes both ways," he said. "You came here to share your message, but you've spent this entire time tearing down everyone who tried to listen." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, the silence worked against her. Simmons, he continued, steady and unwavering. "You've spoken about empowerment, compassion, and understanding. But empowerment doesn't come from talking over people. Compassion doesn't come from condescension, and understanding doesn't come from assuming everyone else knows less than you." She scoffed, shaking her head. "You're twisting everything I've said." Michael leaned forward slightly. "No," he said quietly. "I'm hearing what everyone else is hearing." Shifted again, no longer uncomfortable, now captivated. The tension that had filled the studio for so long had transformed into clarity. Meghan glanced around, realizing how alone she looked under those studio lights. For a brief, flickering second, her face softened. A flash of awareness, maybe even regret. But it passed just as quickly. "This is absurd," she muttered. "I came here to discuss important global issues, not to be ambushed on live television." Michael didn't raise his voice, but the conviction in it carried more weight than any anger could. "You weren't ambushed," he said. "You were given a platform, the same one every guest gets. What you did with it was your choice." The control room remained silent now. No one dared cut the feed. They knew this moment would define the show, and perhaps redefine the host. Meghan exhaled sharply, unhooking her microphone. "I don't have to sit here for this." Michael nodded once. "That's your decision." As she stood, the movement of her chair scraping across the floor echoed through the studio. For a few long seconds, the world seemed to slow. Every camera lens followed her, every audience member holding their breath. She turned to him one last time. "You'll regret this," she said. Rose slowly, his voice calm, unflinching. "No," he said, "because I stood up for the people who make this country work. The people who don't have titles, but have integrity." The words landed with quiet finality. Meghan hesitated, perhaps realizing that in her attempt to dominate the conversation, she had handed him the last word. Then, without another glance, she walked off the set. The heavy studio stayed frozen for a beat before erupting, not in applause, but in a collective exhale of awe and relief. Crimson straightened his tie, turned back to the cameras, and with the ease of a man who'd weathered storms both literal and emotional, smiled. "Well," he said softly, "that wasn't the conversation we planned, but it's one we'll remember." He paused, his voice regaining its warmth. "We'll be right back after this break." As the red light above the camera turned off and the set dimmed, the crew applauded. Quietly at first, then louder, genuine, emotional. It wasn't for spectacle, it was for strength. Behind the glass, the director whispered to the producer, "That's gonna go viral before the hour's up." He was right. By the time the next segment aired, clips were already spreading across every social platform. Headlines would frame it as the interview that broke the script. Commentators would call it a masterclass in grace under fire. Viewers would flood social media with one sentiment echoed across thousands of posts. Michael Strahan stood for us. In the days that followed, journalists dissected every line, every glance, every silence. But beyond the commentary and analysis, one truth endured. On that morning, in that studio, respect wasn't demanded, it was defined. It wasn't about royalty, celebrity, or status. It was about something older, deeper, and infinitely more powerful. The simple decency of treating people well. Michael Strahan didn't win an argument that day. He reminded millions what dignity sounds like when spoken aloud. After the lights dimmed, that sound, calm, firm, unbroken, kept echoing.